Moral reasoning. The philosophical importance of moral reasoning. So, when you hear about moral reasoning, what comes into your mind? Is it a process of determining whether one action is right or wrong, or a method of deliberation for deciding what to do in a particular situation? Well, whatever your answer between the two, it's all correct. Moral reasoning applies critical analysis to specific events to determine what is right or wrong and what people ought to do in a particular situation. Moral reasoning as a species of practical reasoning, that is, as a type of reasoning directed towards deciding what to do, and when successful, issuing an intention. Of course, we also reason theoretically about what morality requires of us, but the nature of purely theoretical reasoning about ethics is adequately addressed in the various articles on ethics. It is also true that, on some understandings, moral reasoning directed towards deciding what to do involves forming judgments about what one ought morally to do. On these understandings, asking what one ought morally to do can be a practical question, a certain way of asking about what to do. In order to do justice to the full range of philosophical views about moral reasoning, we will need to have a capacious understanding of what counts as a moral question. For instance, since a prominent position about moral reasoning is that the relevant considerations are not codifiable, we would beg a central question if we here defined morality as involving codifiable principles or rules. To sum it up, moral reasoning can be thought of as a type of practical reasoning. On some understandings, moral reasoning involves forming judgment about what one ought morally to do. For present purposes, we may understand issues about what is right or wrong, virtues or vicious, as raising moral questions. Now, let's proceed to the forms of moral reasoning.
Forms of moral reasoning. There are three forms of moral reasoning, and those are reasoning from rule or deontological reasoning, reasoning from consequences or teleological reasoning, and lastly, reasoning from virtue, ontological reasoning. So first, let's tackle about reasoning from rule or deontological reasoning. Deontology may be described as obligation-based ethics or duty-based ethics. Moral principles usually take the form of an imperative, setting a duty sufficient in itself to justify an action. An imperative serves as the major premise for a line of deontological or non-consequentialist reasoning. Deontological reasoning states a duty observes that present instance, real or hypothetical, falls under that duty, and proceeds to derive the obligation to carry out the duty in this instance. For example, parents must look after their children, including food to eat, clothes to wear, and safe shelter. The parent knows it against the law to steal and that they will be punished if caught stealing. However, if their family is starving, their obligation to look after their family overrides the moral law of not taking what does belong to you. Stealing is also considered as a legal crime. We are taught not to steal anything or take anybody's thing without asking them. Due to their situation, the person is prepared to accept the bad consequences derived from their actions. The individuals are obligated to act to fulfill their duty even though they know it is wrong. They focus on their duty and not on the effect it has on another person. Now let's move on to reasoning from consequences. Teleological reasoning. Teleology is the study of something in terms of its purpose, end, goal, or function. It was also known as final causality in the past, as opposed to explanation based solely on efficient causes. Ends or goals sought or believed to be pursued are commonly used to explain human behavior. The most familiar form of consequentialist reasoning is the cost-benefit analysis familiar from the business world. To find the right thing to do, You add up the benefits of each of the options, divide the benefits of each course of action by its cost, and select that option with the highest ratio of benefits to cost, purposes, and goals that drives their behavior. For example, Elsa have ice cream in her gutters right now. She is deliberating about when and how to get that ice out in order to prevent water damage inside the house. There are many strategies that she might employ. Should she send his older son, Ellie, up on the icy roof today or not? There is nothing inherently wrong with climbing on the roof. What made roof climbing the wrong thing to do this particular time and place were the possible consequences. In the end, she decided not to send his oldest son, Ellie, up the icy roof because it is slippery and he might fall as consequences. So from the teleological point of view, human actions are neither right nor wrong in and of themselves. What matters is what happened as a consequence of those actions. Those it is the consequences that make actions good or bad, right or wrong. Let's proceed now to our last form of moral reasoning, which is the reasoning from virtue, ontological reasoning. In this argument, we appeal to principles as character traits rather than as goals or rules. As virtues inherent in the moral agent, we go beyond cause, benefit, and role adherence to aim at ideals of conduct and personhood. Every time we act, we simultaneously define ourselves as a person who acts the way, and change ourselves towards a type of person. Virtue ethics does not define initially just what virtues are worth pursuing, must and by whom. In this lack of specificity, it is no worse off than utilitarianism or deontology. By traditions, humans should seek to become temperate, courageous, wise, and just. For moral action, it is essential to acquire just those virtues that will make immoral conduct impossible. Let's take a look to our example. This major and minor premise and conclusion. As the major premise, as aspire to be an honest person, I hate the idea of being a thief. And as for minor premise, taking this necklace makes me a thief. So in conclusion, therefore, I may not take this necklace. Most us abstain from crime because we hold ideals or images for ourselves that are incompatible with petty crime.
Conclusion. So moral reasoning is a study how people think about right and wrong and how they acquire and apply moral rules. And there are three forms of moral reasoning. And the first one is deontological reasoning that states a duty and proceeds to derive the obligation to carry out the duty in this instance. The second one is teleological reasoning, which ends are identified as good and means are selected that will lead to those ends. And lastly, ontological reasoning, in which the type of person one is and the type of moral community one belongs to determines the obligations to act. So overall, I can conclude that moral reasoning seems to involve, at the very least, some manipulation of one's prior moral beliefs. To understand the nature of moral reasoning, then, we must understand how the mind stores and uses these prior moral beliefs, including, among other things, beliefs about moral norms and about the rightness or wrongness of particular action or types of action. That's all. Thank you for listening.